So I just recorded that last update video, and the power's back on, so I'm going to get back to work here. But I wanted to talk about a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and that is Genie, the feral child, who was basically this little girl who, since she was, I think, like 2 years old, 18 months, I think it was, she was locked in a room by her dad, and I really don't think she ever left. And she was just like stuck in this high chair, and she had very little communication. And at the age of 13, she was rescued, but at that point, there was sort of very little the professionals could do for her. And it's just this really interesting case in regards to I guess, how the mind works. And let me just readjust this here. This is something I preferably would want to talk about when I'm a little bit less tired and just exhausted feeling. But I figured I'd. This is a topic I'll probably come back to because I think it's really good. It's the kind of thing I'd wanted to cover on my other YouTube channel, but it just the channel ended up going in a different direction. And while I think the direction's really cool, it's I don't get to cover these kind of topics. It's more history based than psychology, or I guess just disturbing stuff. And the thing with the Genie case is, it does just kind of have that appeal of being something that's sort of dark and disturbing. And I know that sounds messed up, but I mean, I'm into a lot of messed up stuff. Like, some of my favorite videos on YouTube are just people talking about really dark topics in a sort of casual way. Not like a jokey, nonchalant way, but not like a really reverent, like, oh, this is the saddest thing in the world kind of case. I mean, this was a case where, you had a human being just stuck in such an unnatural environment. And it really, like, it's almost like something beyond a horror story. Like, I don't watch much horror, but it's just so bizarre on so many levels. But there's also something interesting about it, in regards to psychology. And it's sort of, you have this school of thought that I think a lot of us are raised with. At least I feel like it was really with my generation. And I'm going to be 28 this year. And it's sort of this really optimistic idea that at any point in someone's life, they can adapt to new circumstances, they can learn new things, they can develop their mind, become smarter, develop their body, and they can basically change who they are. And I think to varying degrees, everyone knows that's bullshit. Though I think there are definitely some people who don't, who are just really naive, um, and sort of delusional almost, especially by the way media everywhere just kind of teaches people to be right now. And the way the Genie case is almost like a really, really hard dose of, I don't want to say conservatism, but that's the best word I can think of, where it's basically like there are some cases where no matter what you do, damage has been done to someone, and there's no reversing it. Because basically what they had with Jeannie was they rescued her when she was 13 years old, and in regards to her mind, her body, her sight, she was just irreparably damaged. As in, like she could only see as far as like, basically, let's say the wall was, I don't know, like 18 feet away. Like, in her high chair sat here, and there was a wall 18 feet away. That's as far as she could see. And anything beyond that was like her eyesight was strained, and it was just like a result of being in those conditions. Her thinking was very rigid and bizarre. her speech was odd, where it was almost like they had a hard enough time teaching her to say words, but they like sorry, I just heard something out there. I think it was just the cat. There's a cat who lives in our garage, and he moved something around. Um, her speech was very like it was hard to teach her to speak, and once they got her to speak, it was almost like robotic and like she didn't understand the words she was saying. Now, I should probably backtrack a little bit. Uh, Not only was she isolated in a room, but her dad never talked to her. So basically, the more the specifics of the situation were her dad kept her in this room, and she had a brother. The brother, I believe, was 5 years older than her, maybe even more. Um, and the mother was still there, but the dad didn't allow them to have almost any interaction with Genie. Um, he would sometimes have the brother help him perform certain tasks, and I believe eventually the mom managed to have some contact with him. I mean, the mom and the brother just like they were already they were mentally screwed up too because the dad was so crazy and abusive and paranoid that he had basically made them afraid to confront him in any way. So he just had Genie in this room, and they couldn't do anything about it. They had to be really quiet. So even though Jeannie wasn't allowed to speak by her dad, but she wasn't even hearing speech because, like, if there was any noise in the house, he would flip out. Like, he would just lose his shit. I can't remember if he would beat them or lock them up. I don't remember exactly what he did, but like, noise really bothered him. Like, really, everyone in the case was interesting. And the dad would like bark at Jeannie. Like he would bark at her. He would pretend like he was a dog at the door. Like it was very rare for her to actually hear speech. And like that's just a I almost said funny thing, but it's not funny. Is um with Jeannie, so the dad would bark at her, and they noticed afterwards the Genie had a horrible fear of dogs, and it's really sad because it's even like the just like cute little puppies she was afraid of because like what they from what they understood is he used to bark at her, and I guess maybe he'd do it in the hallways too. It's just really really weird, messed up stuff, and her conditions were just really weird. She was basically stuck to a high chair all the time. So they have this video footage of her when she was at the one home shortly after she's was rescued, and you could see her walking, and it's so off in so many ways. Her legs are really skinny, and they're sort. I think it's like I don't know if bow-legged is the term, but you could look up the videos. It's you know, her walk's really messed up, and she like kind of keeps her hands forward. It's just it's the weirdest thing. It's almost creepy, but it's really sad too, and you don't know what's going on there. Is it all physical? It probably isn't. The lack of ability to walk, because it's also the aspect of, well, she never really learned to walk in her mind, I guess. I know I'm all over the place here, but this is something I've spent hours reading about, and I haven't really talked about it in a while. So it's like all this stuff's just like coming back to me and just flowing out. And it's not exactly the topic you can talk to your coworkers about, because you're going to sound messed up, and like, especially if people don't know you well, you're just going to scare them by talking about this kind of stuff. But I think it's also really interesting because it sort of lets you know just how much isn't intuitive to people, where it's like all these processes that we do normally, you're sort of reminded that these are all things we have to learn. and even down to just thinking and the way you process words and speech. Um, the feral child thing has happened a few other times, a few other times they know of and have recorded. There's a case I think in France or Germany with this boy called Victor, and that's an older one, and it seems really interesting, but unfortunately, and somehow it's not a more talked about case. So it's like there's a ton of literature on it, but it's all in another language that I don't speak or read. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to get into that case, but I would really like to. Um, there was another girl, another feral child, who I guess was kept in the backyard with her dogs, and you can watch videos of her, and it's really disturbing that like she's older now, and she'll run on fours, and she'll bark like a dog, and it almost at first seems like it might be like some weird act or something. Like you could see someone thinking that, but at the same time, it's like there's something in her face that looks so detached or almost inhuman when she's doing this that it doesn't look like an act. At least it doesn't to me. I I'm convinced this is another effect of just being a feral child. And it's sort of it's interesting how a human can pick up the traits of things that aren't human. And it's just, I think of the best way to break down the case is it's fascinating in regards to nature versus nurture, and what can, like, at what point can you stop learning and developing? At what point are different aspects of your brain just cemented in a way that, like, you can't develop new skills anymore? Um, I started reading this other book because of my interest in the Genie case, and because I had planned to do like a long essay video getting really in depth about it, which just from a business standpoint is not how you start your YouTube channel. You don't put all this work into these really big projects right away. You're just wasting time and money. But I'd read this book called The Growth of the Mind, and I can't remember the author, but he was like a child psychologist or something. And he worked with kids a lot, in particular kids with learning disabilities. And what he found is he would work with kids, let's say, with autism. And he found that if you catch the kids when they're young enough and you deal with the certain behaviors in a targeted way, is you could basically get the kids to develop like they were normal, or at very least a lot more functional than they would later be. Now, I don't know if he addressed this specifically, but so I don't want to misquote the guy, but I think he did say there's sort of like an age limit where it's like past a certain point, it's almost like certain things become cemented in the brain and you can't undo them. Or at very least, you can't undo them to the extent you could have if you caught it early. But that's something that I thought was interesting from more of an optimistic perspective, is the idea that all these kids with these mental issues that you really, it's basically deemed as, well, you can't fix them. Or I think what's even worse is that, well, there's nothing wrong with them. Everyone's just different. Everyone's a special snowflake. And what they found is that you can change some of these things if you catch them early enough. And it wasn't through medication. Once again, I don't want to misquote the guy. I don't think it was through medication. It was just through dealing with them in different ways and talking to them and sort of disciplining them. Um, they were able to work out these really bad behaviors. And speaking on the autism thing, I guess this video might go to be 20 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it shorter. And this is a topic I'll revisit in the future. But like with the autism thing, a lot of people speculated that Genie was autistic, and that's why she was so screwed up. And it didn't have anything to do with the fact, the nurture aspect. Like, basically, they argued that Genie was taken from her bad environment at age 13 and dealt with by doctors. And the reason they couldn't really make much progress with her wasn't because the nurturing had screwed her up so much, but because she had autism or she had some other disability. And that was the argument for why this was the case. And they were basically saying if uh, a totally normal child had been in Genie's circumstances, well, she would have been able to develop just fine, even, with being so messed up young in life. And the thing is that that's sort of inconclusive. Is did she have some sort of mental defect at birth? And there's some evidence that she might have had something, but my impression was that even if she had something, it did not justify the extent to which she was messed up. Like, clearly it was the nurturing rather than the nature that made her as bad as she was. Um, some people even speculate that maybe she developed something like autism because of the way she was raised. Maybe that actually happened. When you get into mental disorders, it's really hard to name stuff because there's so much bleed over. And I guess I should say this late into the video in case anyone does watch this. I have absolutely zero medical training. I just read stuff that I think is interesting. And I guess I've read some, some like the scientific stuff, like NCBI articles and like the actual book written on Genie, like by the doctor who worked with her, Susan Curtis. But I have no training in how you're supposed to evaluate this stuff. And like, I'm not a professional in any way. I'm just someone who finds this stuff really interesting. Yeah, and basically with Genie, there were all these different people who worked with her. There was this whole drama of all her different caretakers and her being swapped between different families. And one of the things that, at least one of her caretakers, I think it was this one couple that had her, one of the things they agreed on is they think she would have come a lot further along if she had consistent caretakers after being rescued. And simply put, they weren't able to do that because there was all this battle between some people being like, well, we're interested in the science. Some people like, she's basically irreparably damaged. We just want to take care of her. Maybe some people with malicious intentions. And basically the way she ended up was, I think she's still alive, and I think she just lives in some home. And the last time someone had visited her, like someone who had dealt with her as a child, because now she's like probably in her 60s or older. Basically, they said all the progress had gone, or at least most of it. She just like she had regressed so much because I guess like no one was keeping up with her. And that's kind of interesting in itself. Is there the fact that she regressed and didn't start developing on her own, was that like bound to happen? Like, was the only reason she was making any progress because doctors were, sort of pushing her to, or, see, I don't. There's a whole bunch of angles there. I'm kind of, I won't go on with that too much longer. But the other thing I found really, really interesting that I want to talk about before this video hits the 25-minute mark, I guess it's getting there, is the idea of Genie really had an attachment to her mother. And that became one of the things. She was like, I want my mom. I want my mom. And what's really interesting about that is when, like, I've researched or talked to people who've dealt with, like, let's say juvenile delinquents and criminals, because a lot of times these are the people who, they don't have good parents in their life. And that seems to be a key factor, is basically like if you don't have some loving person in your life, like at least one person who gives you some love and affection, I don't want to say you're doomed to be a psychopath, but you're basically doomed. Like you sort of need someone, even if they don't have a ton of influence in your life. Um, Maybe it's just like an uncle or a teacher. And what's interesting with Genie is that there seem to be signs that, yeah, she could be affectionate with people. And that seemed to be something that stayed with her even beyond when doctors were no longer working with her. I think till the day her mother died, she was really attached to her mother, and she could show, she could definitely show love and emotion and that feeling of sadness and anxiety when her mom wasn't around. Now it's interesting because at first when she was rescued, she sort of wanted nothing to do with her mom. She just wasn't too interested. It was almost like her mother just meant nothing to her. But over time, she wanted to see her more. And I think what they learned is that in those first 18 months before Jeannie had been put in before she had basically been locked in the room and she was allowed to develop somewhat normally, is that the mom did interact with her a lot. And my theory is that that was enough to basically create those, I don't know, that those emotions and that humanity. Because you hear about some people who just lack that completely, where it's like, you know, I don't know. This probably sounds really cruel, but it's hard for me to be sympathetic toward a lot of people with mental disorders when they almost don't seem human. Like they show no affection, and they almost seem like less functional versions of the twins from Breaking Bad, where it's just like they seem almost like robots. Like they just want to eat their chicken nuggets and play their video games. Um, and a lot of times, what you also see, like I went to a private school where there were kids with all sorts of disabilities. And sometimes what you would see is these kids who were slow or awkward, um, but they were really like kind, uh, emotionally functional people. And it was just like yeah, obviously they're slow, and you sort of you got to interact with them a certain way, and it can be awkward, but you really felt a lot more comfortable around them. Strangely enough, I remember this one kid who I didn't even know he had autism for the longest time, but he was just like a super great guy, and really didn't give off those psychopath vibes at all. And sorry, there's something rolling around outside. I don't know what that is. Might be someone running, maybe a blower or something. I don't know. Anyways, um, yeah, this kid was autistic, and usually what you think is, or what I've heard is, autistic people are very emotionally detached, and that's kind of been my experience. But um, there were a few kids at that school who weren't, so it sort of makes me question what was different in their upbringing. And with this one particular kid, I know he was like he said his parents were very hard on them and on him. And the one time I met them, there's only so much you could get from one meeting, but I got that impression that they were sort of very conservative in their rearing. Not they didn't seem cruel or abusive or anything like that, but probably just harsh. Weren't going to let him get away with being obnoxious or crude or cruel. Um, but anyways, it's the garbage truck going off. That's what I hear out there. Um, I guess part of this stuff interests me so much is because I know I have all sorts of mental issues, sort of just like OCD and I don't know. Like you can probably just tell from the videos here that you know, a little off base, a little odd. Um, And I think part of it's just like, understanding where some of those problems might come from and what's worth working on and what's not. Um, Altogether, I think it's just Genie, the feral child. If you look it up, it's a really interesting case. It's it's I don't know. It's just really fascinating. That's all I'm going to talk about it right now. It's all I'm going to talk about for right. See, maybe it's just me being messed up and a combination between that and me being really tired. But now I'm losing my ability to speak. I'm going to wrap things up here, and I hope to do more videos like this. And if not, I'll definitely be doing more update videos on the progress of my channel.